it ever since.
So we just went through a emergency 50 basis point rate cut. I saw a guy on television, I forget his name, yesterday, literally saying in the next 2 weeks we could be at zero, which seems a little aggressive. Where do we go from here?
Well, look, we were pricing in a recession, and now we're pricing in something else. So it's gone faster than we've expected. So this is...
And that's because your argument is the economic kind of macro situation was slowing, everything that you had been talking about,
There was going to be a recession coming, right?
And then
Global
you get
trade,
this
tariffs.
accelerant. You get an accelerant with the coronavirus.
Well, we had two accelerants, right? So we had the Fed raising rates back in 2017, and they'd gone too far. So you saw it because you start seeing the curve inverting, you start seeing all of this signs that the Fed had gone too far, which was extraordinary because they barely raised rates, but that was the situation. So that was the slowdown, that was set. Then we had trade war. So trade war and tariffs, that was the kindling for the recession. So that's the recession we were going to get. And then the coronavirus comes, and now we're going to get something entirely different.
Where do you think we're going? Right, if we're not getting a recession, what is it?
You know the answer. That's why you're asking.
So, listen, the reason why I'm so excited to have you here is because you have become, you know what a storm chaser is? Like a tornado chaser,
No.
right? So
yeah, well, I
basically,
do, yeah.
they go and they try to find the tornadoes, and they're the psychos that are driving on the road and they're filming the tornado. To me, you're a crisis chaser, right? Meaning that it's not that you want a crisis to happen, because a lot of people get hurt and it's a really bad situation, but you have the clarity to see them coming, and you've also lived through a number of them.
I've seen them before, and I know. See, the point being...
So you're the crisis chaser.
Yeah, the point being is it's about human behavior. It's not about what's right, what's wrong, and it's not about how you should interpret the numbers wrong. Nothing. It's like, when it comes to a crisis, whether it was the Asian crisis, whether it was the bond market crisis in 94, the Asian crisis in 97, the dot-com bust, or the banking crisis, they're all human behavior. And once you understand that humans are about to panic, it's when everything moves fast.
Yeah. And I think that if you are a good investor, you actually slow down, right? You don't have to get caught up in that panic. It's like having the emotional
No, the best
stability.
thing is really what I did in this situation, and I did in all the other situations, was I doubled up ahead of the panic. When I saw that it was likely to lead to a panic, because my job is not to live in the present. It's everybody makes the mistake of living in the present, saying, oh, the virus numbers today are X. That is not what you're doing. You have to extrapolate, and you have to think of possible futures, of which you don't know. There are no certainties. But it's extrapolating positive futures. When you see a path of events that seems much more probable than the market expects, and you can see a clear understanding of how people are going to react to that, then you have something really meaty. With this situation, it was clear that the moment the virus spread outside China, it was clear that China had gone into total shutdown. Okay, we've never seen that in our lifetimes anywhere in any country.
So this is important. Let's talk about exactly what's happening.
There's a lot to talk about in this.
So there's a virus. The Chinese government gets wind of, hey, this is spreading, this is a problem. And there's a couple of different ways to look at how they've reacted. There's the kind of medical reaction. So this is where you see quarantines and building of hospitals and all that kind of stuff. But the economic impact of a lot of this is literally they just went into complete shutdown. Nobody go anywhere, do anything.
Yeah, so the idea is, if you've got a really bad outbreak of an unknown virus, you can either take the risk and have mass death. Even with a death rate, the WHO today says it's 3.5%. So with a population the size of China's, and it's an aging population, and it affects old people more, that is too much for the government to deal with. And you have unknowns, because you don't know the death rate at that point. You don't know the spread rate. What they clearly knew is spreading fast, very fast. So I think what's known as the RO, or the R, was above anything from the common flu to the Spanish flu to any of the known pandemics. So they knew that it was extremely dangerous. Hence why you go to the kind of economic lockdown, which is to quarantine parts of the population, because the weird part of this virus is it's not detectable for 2 weeks and up to 27 days. So we can all have it here and we have no symptoms, and we're spreading it around and we don't know. Right, that is like a nuclear fucking warhead, right? Yep. You have no idea. You have one of the fastest spreading viruses we know of, and it's undetectable. And it has a high death rate. Even though people say, oh, it's not a very high death rate, when you actually impute the numbers, it's a staggering number of people that could die from this.
The numbers that I looked at this morning, basically, anyway, I think it was 18 to 40 or something was the bucket that they showed. The flu death rate is 0.02%, and the coronavirus death rate is 0.2. So literally a 10x. Now, it's still 20 basis points.
Yeah.
But when you start to look at that,
and again,
it's still scary.
Don't think about the death rate, because everyone will say, well, it's not that relevant. It's 2% or 3.5%. And it only affects old people. It's not going to affect me.
But it's the economic impact.
It's the fact that when you impute the numbers, that it spreads faster than the Spanish flu, but let's assume it reaches the same number of people as the Spanish flu. Let's assume nobody quarantines countries like China, which was the right thing to do. Then Spanish flu hit 27% of the entire world's population. And at the time, that meant 500 million people were infected, and in the end, about 30 million people died.
Okay.
If you look at 27% of the population now, it's about 2 billion people. If you have a death rate of 3.5%, 68 million people would die. So that's your base worst case scenario. So then that's what that's the outcome if you don't do anything. So every government is going to do everything they can, because also it disproportionately affects Western developed nations.
Why?
Because you've got old populations, all of us. Right? So you have a significant problem. Also, old populations who get a virus. I mean, the death rate of people who go into hospital is huge in this virus, and there's a large number of people who have to go into hospital. We have no ability to deal with this in the medical system. So they have no choice but to start quarantining nations, or at least large regions.
Which has a ridiculous economic impact in terms of the slowdown. The number, talk a little bit about the numbers that came out of China that you saw.
I mean, China car sales fell 92%, and this month they're down 80-something%.
That's fucking wild.
The PMI, the Purchasing Managers Index for China, had the largest fall I've ever seen in any economic statistic I've ever seen, and that is in the second largest economy on earth with the largest population. It is mind-blowing. And no wonder the oil prices collapse. No wonder all of these things are happening. And that's just China. The point being to all of this is next, it was South Korea. South Korea is a great medical system, and they were on top of it fast. They're slowing the rate of the virus, but they've still got thousands of people affected, and the death rate is climbing. And it's not going to go. And then it spread regionally. But then the next big cluster was Italy. Italy exploded, and it's still going. Because there's bloody flights every 10 minutes from Malpensa. I mean, are you crazy? It's now exploding in Spain, France, Germany.
Iran. Yep.
Iran was truly extraordinary because it was a different strain. They didn't know that it had come from China, or whether it had come from China. And literally 10% of all government officials are infected. 50% or 20% of the entire government is ill. So
it's crazy.
So back that out to what is about to happen, right? What's interesting is South Korea is testing thousands of people a day to get on top of where it is, where it's moving, what we have to do, who we need to quarantine. The US, up until last Friday, had tested 500 people. And they had only tested people that had come from China or Japan or a country that had the virus.
And I think this is where we get Washington State. There was the outbreak, and kind of a whole group of people have now tested positive. They all are circulating. Either they worked at or patients at, or I guess live at this nursing home. And I was reading this morning that in Wake County, North Carolina, actually where I'm from, there's a coronavirus confirmation case. And you start reading about, well, how the hell does that happen? The person went to that nursing home a couple of weeks ago, comes back to North Carolina.
So the point being, a couple of weeks ago, right? Yep. So it's very clear that the coronavirus has been spreading undetected and uninvaded in the United States for at least 3 weeks. There was a weird, ridiculous situation where the CDC and the FDA got into some regulatory mess where it got declared a national emergency, which meant that only the CDC could do testing with CDC-approved equipment, of which there was only one place in Atlanta to do it. They eventually got it out to 40 different places, eventually, but no testing went ahead because the kits were not approved and there were some malfunctions with the kit. So there's been no testing in America. So nurses and doctors and healthcare workers have been treating people without taking precautions.
Mm-hmm.
There is no tracking of pneumonia cases yet because they're most likely to be coronavirus cases. So the point being is, when you look forward, and Boris Johnson was good yesterday in the UK when he said, listen, 80% of the population could get this, and this is going to be huge, and we may have to shut down the entire country. And he's right to get the narrative that far, that fast, to get people to understand the seriousness of it. Because in the US, people don't even understand this. They're still going, it's the flu. No, it's not the flu. The size of it and the speed at which it spreads and the incremental increase in deaths worldwide is not something a government will take. Mm-hmm. So they're going to have to close large parts of the economy. And nobody's going to fly. I mean, this will be the last flight I take, is the flight I go back to the Cayman Islands. And I think the Cayman Islands will shut. And I've already been speaking to some of the doctors there and blah, blah, blah. We haven't got any cases yet. But they know it's going to shut.
Yeah. So when that happens, if it's not a recession, if it's something worse.
Yeah, so look, the clear thing is we were going to a recession. Could have been a mild one, could have been a big one. We don't really know, but we were going to a recession. This just pressed the nuclear button for depression. Now, I say that not lightly. There is always a probability that it doesn't happen, but it's become my base case now. Because I do not see a world in which there is not an outcome that they have to shut down whole parts of economies, whether that's travel, tourism, conferences, businesses, all of this stuff.
We're already seeing it. It's already starting to happen, right? We're seeing conferences get canceled. We're seeing obvious slowdowns in travel and tourism.
So wait when they quarantine people at home. Mm-hmm. It's not long before you guys are going to be at home doing this, self-quarantined. Mm-hmm. It's going to happen because you're going to want to do that for your own sake, and you don't want to be part of the spread of the virus.
Yep.
Because it's going to be your mother or grandmother that gets killed.
So your argument here is the virus itself is simply an accelerant on a situation that was already turning bad, right, in the economic kind of recessionary period. And now what we're going to do is we're actually going to extend that into an actual depression. And really it's the response to the virus.
I don't deal in certainties, but I'm saying that the
probability,
the highest probability event now is a much larger event. And I think potentially my base case is becoming, and we have to see over the next 4 weeks, my base case is coming that this will be the worst economic event of our lifetimes. So this is much larger than 2008.